Okay, I think we're about to get started. We gave everybody an extra half hour this morning because we usually have a certain crowd that likes to stay out late on Monday evenings. But it's a great pleasure to have Kent Walker here to open up today's proceedings. Kent is the Senior Vice President and General Counsel at Google, where he's responsible for managing Google's global legal team and advising the company's board and management on legal issues, as well as corporate governance matters. Prior to joining Google, Kent held senior legal positions at a number of leading technology companies. Most recently, he was Deputy General Counsel of eBay, and previously he was Executive Vice President of Liberate Technologies, Associate General Counsel for Netscape and America Online, and Senior Counsel for AirTouch Communications. Earlier in his career, Kent was an Assistant U.S. Attorney with the Department of Justice, where he specialized in prosecution of technology crimes and advised the Attorney General on management and technology issues. He served on the boards of a number of technology industry trade associations, and he is a graduate of Harvard College and Stanford Law School. And the title of his talk today is Regulating Magic. Kent.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you all for showing up after enjoying Aspen last night. I appreciate it. I appreciate the chance as well to talk to all of you this morning. We've heard a lot from Phil and Gordon and others talking about very thoughtfully the challenges that technology faces, and a lot from a number of the speakers about the issues of economics and incentives and efficiencies that are all very important and maybe even critical to investment in new technology. But I'm not an economist and I'm not an investor, so I figured maybe the best way I could contribute to the conversation that we're having is to share a somewhat different perspective. And that's the perspective of the creators, of the kinds of engineers who are creating these new technologies that we're lucky enough to work with most every day. So I'd like to talk about the magic of technology and how our technology policy can embrace and maybe even enhance it. Silicon Valley has been home for me and several generations of my family, back from the days when it was called the Valley of the Heart's Delight. And we've watched apricot orchards turn into garages, and garages turn into office parks, and office parks go from boom to bust to boom again. I've worked for, as you just heard, a lot of tech companies, for Netscape and AOL, for eBay, for Liberate, a company that memorably went from nothing to $12 billion in market cap to bankrupt in 3 years. I've worked for eBay, and now I work at Google. For decades, Silicon Valley has been a place where people have come with a mix of hope and grit in trying to make their dreams real. And that spirit is not unique to Silicon Valley. It's true at Research Triangle, it's true in Route 128, it's true in Denver and in Austin, and even in Washington, D.C. And it's become critical to our national economy and the jobs we create. They say man is a tool-building animal, and we have built some really amazing tools. But for many of us, the potential of technology resonates on an even deeper level. As a kid growing up in the Valley, what my dad used to call a place somewhere between farmland and the future, I love science fiction. Writers like Arthur C. Clarke and Isaac Asimov and Ray Bradbury and Robert Heinlein. The love of science fiction is a common denominator for a lot of the great engineers I've met, and it's the jumping off point for my talk today. Clarke famously wrote that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And that magic is what great engineers and great companies aspire to deliver. Not for nothing did Katie Hafner call her book about the creation of the internet, Where the Wizards Stay Up Late. Clarke went on to predict that someday man would have, quote, in his own house, a console through which he can talk through his local computer and get all the information he needs for his everyday life, like his bank statements, his theater reservations. And, quote, he will take it as much for granted as we take the telephone. Clarke was right. We've quickly come to take the magic for granted. We now get annoyed when our Wi-Fi connection is slow and it takes us 10 seconds to do something that a few years ago would have taken a trip across town. And God forbid our internet connection should go out, even when we're on an airplane at 35,000 feet in the air. Thanks to the cloud, we're now seeing Metcalfe's law cubed, as the cost of transmission and processing and memory all asymptotically approach zero. We get the ability to access and share and use information in ways the world has never seen. The magicians of technology haven't just delighted consumers, they've transformed our culture and our economy. We're now seeing things that folks a generation ago would have found not just surprising, but astonishing, awe-inspiring. More people around the world have access to cell phones than have access to decent sanitation. A kid in Bangladesh uses the same tool to access information and facts around the world as the President of the United States. In the last 30 years, improvements in transportation and communication have brought hundreds of millions of people in India and China and Africa out of poverty, a world historic transformation. These are incredibly empowering and democratizing trends. To believe in this, we don't have to subscribe to a naive technological utopianism. Of course, technology sometimes doesn't work out. And as I know from years as a federal prosecutor, there will always be people who try and use new tools to deceive and defraud consumers for their own gain. But to borrow from Dr. King, the arc of history is long and it bends toward progress. It bends toward progress. The history of mankind over the last 500 years is an almost uninterrupted history of technological improvement and rising living standards for people around the world. Technology exists to solve problems, sometimes to solve problems we haven't even yet framed as problems. Henry Ford once said that if I'd listened to my consumers, I would have built a faster horse. Our technological advances have laid a foundation for economic, civil, and political empowerment and social engagement, cultural advances, and growing global ties. At the Googleplex out in California, foreign visitors often ask, how can we create our own Silicon Valley? How can we encourage innovators in our own country? So today I'd like to talk first about the key ingredients in the magic that technology makes real every day, and then turn to the maybe harder questions of how government and industry and inventors and innovators can work together to keep that magic alive. I'd suggest that there are three key ingredients to creating technological magic. First, embracing failure. Second, embracing sharing. And third, embracing the future. I'll tell you what I mean by that. First, let's talk about embracing failure. Change, progress, requires a spirit of adventure and daring. Hewlett and Packard, Noyce and Moore, Clark and Andreessen, Steve Jobs, and thousands of engineers and visionaries like them built on each other's big bets and wild gambles. They are exactly the kind of people who dreamt of things that never were and asked why not. Larry and Sergey talk about nurturing a healthy disregard for the impossible. And Larry's on the record as saying that it's easier to make progress on mega ambitious goals than on less risky projects because few people are crazy enough to try. People in the world of technology are generally optimists about failure. We get there is no difference, there's no effort without error and shortcoming. We experiment. We fail. We fail more often than we might like sometimes. But we learn, and we try again. Google search engineers tested more than 40,000 potential improvements last year. Most failed. Never saw the light of day. In some countries, bankruptcy is a criminal offense. But Ed Zhao, for years our local congressman, took a uniquely American pride in having had a company declare bankruptcy. If you hadn't failed at least once, he said, you hadn't really tried. And that resonated with the voters. The tolerance for failure has been key to an industry that's grown faster than any other in the country, and more importantly, has helped fuel the growth of national and global economies. The second ingredient in making technological magic is embracing sharing and a culture of cumulative innovation. Cumulative innovation has always been a hallmark of cutting-edge technology. What do I mean by that? Every new product builds on the previous generation's inventions and the ideas all around us. From the days of Shockley Semiconductor and the departing employees who Shockley branded the traitorous eight, California's labor laws have always favored the ability of employees to move from one company to another, cross-fertilizing new ideas. We all stand on each other's shoulders. Another example, smartphone patents have been in the news a lot lately. And we forget that the smartphones of today owe a debt of invention that stretches back decades. Steve Jobs famously quoted Pablo Picasso in a 1990s interview saying, "Good artists copy, great artists steal." Xerox PARC was tracking touch in 1991. IBM had a touch-screen phone in 1993. And Nokia had both a smartphone and a tablet computer by the late 1990s. More recently, the rise of the internet and a new generation of creative tools has made collaboration even easier, contributing to the rise of open source software, crowdsourcing tools that share information, and the ability to draw on collective intelligence to provide the information that's right for you, when you need it, where you need it. Remix culture is one of the keys to the magic of the internet. Today's consumers aren't just consuming, they're creating. The internet isn't just another distribution channel, it's a creation channel. It's one of the uniquely generative parts of the internet. We talk about consumers as though they're passive, but the internet is increasingly erasing the line between consumers and producers. People don't just read blogs and watch videos. They upload and they create and upload and distribute them. We all want our kids not to be just couch potato consumers, but creators, authors and artists, bloggers and curators. The internet creates a rich commons, making it ever easier for people to see and be inspired by and recombine ideas in newly creative ways. And that sharing goes beyond individuals remixing songs or co-creating code. It's also about small companies building on larger platforms to help them find an audience or more customers. Over 1 million people now earn all or part of their living on eBay. The corner game shop can now connect through buyers not just around the corner, but around the world. The online gaming company Zynga came to prominence by developing for Facebook's social platform. More than 500,000 people make a living writing apps for Apple and Android platforms. Google last year drove $80 billion to advertisers and publishers in the United States alone, and YouTube is empowering a new generation of artists, from Justin Bieber to a dozen people you've probably never heard of, but your kids probably have. And thousands of YouTube partners now make over $100,000 a year. In our industry, innovation and creativity are cumulative, and the barriers to creation have always been low and are getting lower. And that's been another essential ingredient in the resulting magic. Let me now turn to the third and most important ingredient, embracing the future. When I was growing up, the idea of a device that could let you have a video chat across the globe, access the world's information, give updates on weather and traffic, talk and recognize speech, and translate 50 different languages, and do all that while fitting in the palm of your hand would have been beyond surprising. It was quite literally straight out of Star Trek. We've now built Star Trek communicators and tricorders and universal translators. In fact, pretty much everything but phasers, and Sergey may be working on that somewhere. At Google alone, in the past year, we took the wraps off of cars that drive themselves. We unveiled our work on computers you can wear, Google Glass. We started laying fiber in Kansas City that'll deliver gigabit broadband speeds, potentially unleashing a generation of new applications. And we launched Google Now, a virtual assistant that can proactively tell you when your commute is going to be longer than usual, when your flight is delayed, or how your favorite sports team is doing. What's new is that the future keeps coming faster and faster. Alvin Toffler in Future Shock was right. Technological change comes ever more quickly, and sometimes we risk valuing what we have more than what the future offers. As the behavioral psychologist would say, people are risk-averse, intuitively attached to the status quo. Change, disruption is tough. And there are lots of examples we've seen in the last few months and years. In Boston and DC, taxi cab companies attacked the car share service Uber, nearly persuading local regulators to jack up their fares or ban its service. It's a pretty good service. I took it to the airport on the way here. Earlier this year, politicians criticized Amazon's Price Check app, raising concerns that it could take sales from local brick-and-mortar merchants who couldn't meet Amazon's prices. A few years ago, the National Association of Realtors threatened to withhold listings from Redfin, the online broker, because Redfin charged lower commissions. And it's not just a question of economic disruption. As we heard yesterday, sometimes technology also challenges cultural norms or creates new ones. And norms evolve over days or years or even generations in ways that are hard to predict, let alone write into law. We want to make sure that technology policy accepts and even embraces the unexpected. No one wants to wrap the future in yellow caution tape. And no one wants to erode America's role as a place where you can experiment and innovate without permission. The magic that results is not always pretty or predictable, but it is ultimately transformative, uplifting, and even revolutionary. Government plays a critical role in setting and enforcing clear rules of the road. In making policy, we should work together to focus on people in all their variety as consumers and producers. Focus on helping them identify and avoid serious harms, remembering their different preferences, and knowing that they value and come to value what technology offers. And we need to work together to not only have strong enforcement, but also good rule of law principles that guide innovators while protecting people. These aren't partisan ideas. They're not Republican ideas, and they're not Democratic ideas. They're not libertarian ideas, and they're not progressive ideas. Democrats believe in promoting innovation. Republicans believe in avoiding consumer harm. The challenge for us is to work together to forge a policy that accomplishes both. As Phil Weiser said in kicking off this conference, the future doesn't have a lobbyist. But we have to do the best we can do to keep the future in mind when we're thinking about how to set good policy going forward. So let's talk specifics. If the key ingredients to magic are embracing failure, embracing sharing, and embracing the future, what are some practical ways policy can help not just permit, but promote the kind of practical magic that Arthur C. Clarke talked about? I'd like to focus on two policy areas in particular today: patents and competition. First, patents, and first a quick drink of water. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution says that patents are to promote the progress of science and useful arts, maximizing social welfare and progress. But while today's patent system may promote innovation in some areas like pharmaceuticals, it's clear that the current patent rules aren't working for software, where competition, not patent protection, drives innovation. In pharma, it costs millions of dollars to get a new drug to market, and companies often won't make that investment without strong patent protection. Whereas in software, the prospect of being first to market is itself enough to drive two guys in a garage to create great new products. In pharma, drugs remain valuable for many years, and long patent protection lets companies recoup their investment. In software, the value of a new feature often evaporates in a few months or years, leaving 20-year-long patents hanging around as a threat to new innovations. In pharma, a new drug may be covered by 1 or 2 patents. In software, cumulative innovation means that by one estimate, a single cell phone might implicate up to 250,000 patents. And finally, in pharma, a drug patent often clearly claims a specific combination of molecules in a specific array. In software, the opposite is true. Patent claims are often extraordinarily vague, processes facilitating methods to facilitate processes, making it hard to evaluate either obviousness or infringement. These differences have led to depressing results. 1/3 of all patent lawsuits now involve software patents, way out of whack to the relative size of the industry. Software and internet patents are litigated 8 times more often than other patents. Troll lawsuits cost productive U.S. companies $29 billion in direct payouts last year, $80 billion a year when you take all the costs into account, and more than $500 billion in the years since the Federal Circuit first authorized software patents. Worst of all, wasteful patent litigation is costing consumers real money and real choices in the devices they love. This happens because software patents too often allows ownership of broad and sometimes even trivial ideas. It should not be this way. It is the execution as much as the idea that often matters in the marketplace. Facebook wasn't the first social network, but it thrived because it executed well. Google wasn't the first in search, but the way we executed has made our results better. We need to refocus the patent system around software patents to support, not attack, the execution of ideas so that consumers will see more magical products. Google's trying to do our part. Last week, we launched a prior art finder to make it easier to determine the novelty of a patent idea. But we need public policy to do its part, too, to make sure that patents aren't just bargaining chips in litigation. 3 suggestions. First, we should stop bad software patents from issuing. The courts and the PTO should raise the bar for patenting software. They should demand better descriptions in software patents and clearer claims that map the real contribution, not more. Patents should be granted only when the incentive of a patent grant was needed to create the invention. Second, we should weed out the bad software patents that have already issued. Congress should extend the program in the American Invents Act for challenging financial business method patents to include all software patents. This would give us a better tool for striking down the many invalid patents that are already out there. Congress should also establish stronger prior user rights and loser pays fee shifting in meritless cases to promote innovation, not litigation. And third, we should keep an eye on the growing anti-competitive abuse of dubious patents, with companies colluding and using trolls to do their bidding. Companies are increasingly transferring patents to trolls in order to circumvent FRAND or other licensing commitments. This is a train wreck from a competition perspective, and we should watch it closely. Patents are meant to advance innovation, not retard it, and these changes would steer the system back in that direction. Next, let's turn to competition policy. As you've likely heard, the internet is a great disintermediator, cutting out middlemen, removing friction, and reducing barriers to entry. And while startups with magical ideas are born every week, it's also true we're in the midst of both epic competition and novel partnerships between some of the tech world's biggest players. Co-opetition is a remarkable thing, at least for consumers. In just the last year, Apple worked with Nuance to launch Siri, which you can think of as its own search engine, and is soon launching its own mapping service. Microsoft has deepened its social integration with Facebook, and Apple has expanded its partnerships with Yelp and Twitter. Meanwhile, companies like Facebook, Zynga, Yelp, Kayak, and LinkedIn have gone public, raising billions to invest in new products and features. A few years ago, it might have been enough for companies like eBay, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Facebook to invent or perfect a model like auctions or search or social. But increasingly, the thing you're good at is really just a foundation for competing with everybody else. Just as Google has gotten into operating systems and social, Amazon has gotten into e-commerce and cloud storage, Apple's gotten into maps and voice recognition, Facebook and Apple may be joining Google, Bing, Yahoo, Amazon, and eBay in search, and everybody's launching their own mobile device. In short, everyone's competing with everyone else. And the rise of the app economy and crowdsourced fundraising tools like Kickstarter are lowering the barriers for new entry. Schumpeter's gale of creative destruction has never blown harder. And while that leads to great new services for consumers and society, it can be unsettling for businesses that have to compete and change. It's a natural human instinct to be fond of the businesses and products and people that we know and have a hard time imagining what the future will bring in their place. But the lesson of all of our history is that the future is almost always better than the past. We need to be careful not to let our instinctive comfort with the status quo block new services from improving our lives. So here are some recommendations for how to do that in the competition setting. First, we should recognize that modern technology markets are broad and fluid. As I said earlier, a technology leader can no longer rest on its laurels. Everyone competes against everyone. Markets are almost always broader than we think and changing faster than anyone realizes. Ubiquitous broadband, wireless, the openness of the web, and the rise of new platforms have erased old boundaries. If I want to buy shoes, I can use Amazon, Gilt, eBay, Google, Zappos, a comparison shopping site like Nextag, any one of a dozen apps, or even go down to my local shoe store. That's even more true of digital goods, with many marketplaces from Apple and Amazon and Google and services like Pandora and Spotify. There's no shortage of alternatives. To the contrary, market choice is expanding every day, and that's great for everybody. Second, we should pay close attention to switching costs and lock-in. Since everyone is competing against everyone else, consumers, advertisers, and publishers typically have lots of options. But those options are less useful if walled gardens or proprietary formats make it difficult for users to switch. That's why Google created our data liberation front, letting users easily export their data. The inability to move your data, like contacts, emails, and web history, from one service to another makes switching more difficult and increases potential for lock-in. That's bad for consumers and bad for competition. And third, we should encourage openness. An open web has made competition possible and promoted free expression around the world, while open source software has sparked new innovation. Encouraging both helps spur the next generation of disruptors. Open source means that magical improvements come faster because they can come from anywhere, not just engineers at big companies. And those improvements can be then built upon by anyone, anywhere. For example, open source competition in browsers from WebKit and Firefox and Chrome help make all browsers, including Internet Explorer, faster for everyone. Open source Android lets developers and manufacturers compete for users, even as compatibility requirements keep Android from fragmenting. The resulting competition has been great for consumers, delivering lower prices and more choices. Openness, and open source software in particular, has not only reduced or eliminated lock-in, but affirmatively increased competition. So let me conclude with a story. I was recently at an airport, and I was standing next to an Indian couple who spoke Hindi. They'd missed their flight. They were having a hard time communicating with the gate agent who didn't speak Hindi. I was able to pull out my phone, open a translation app, turn it into conversation mode, and pretty soon they were having a Hindi-English conversation, and the couple was able to rebook their flight. Something like that would have been imaginable just a few years ago. We are just beginning to imagine and create a new realm of the possible. Cars that drive you to work, calendars that let you know when traffic is bad and you need to leave early for your next appointment, wearable computers that are always at hand, offering the power of the cloud to help you out, to give you what you want when you need it. We love cool new technology because it constantly wows us. A new app on a friend's phone, a post about a great new service. Technology, science fiction made real, is constantly making complex things simpler, making difficult things easier, and making life better for millions of people around the world. With apologies to Samuel Morrison, his 1853 court case, let's make sure that our public policy and law don't just look backward to precedent, but also look forward to the future, looking forward to establishing clear principles, rules, and standards that stand the test of time. Sadly, I don't get to read much science fiction anymore, but we are all lucky to be witnesses to the science fiction that's all around us. By embracing failure, sharing, and the future, by ensuring that patents reward the astonishing and not the obvious, by promoting choice and openness, we can keep a healthy respect for magic at the heart of our technology policy and help the next generation turn their science fiction dreams into reality. Thank you very much.
We have time maybe for a couple of questions, if there are any. Barry?
So Ken, what you said today sounds very much like what Virginia Pestrel said in her 1998 book, The Future and Its Enemies. And when you encouraged us to embrace the future, you were very much reminding us of the danger of falling into the stasis mentality that she described. And she pitted that in two camps, the reactionaries who really fear technology and want to thwart it, and the technocrats who love technology but think that the right regulators, the right people in government can steer technology to serve us. And she instead promoted what she called evolutionary dynamism. So my question for you is, since you seem very much to fall into her camp of dynamism, and you seem to be describing that that's the thing that really bridges left and right, the thing that goes beyond libertarianism or progressivism or anything else, how do you see that playing out in policy debates today? And in particular, are you optimistic that moving forward after, say, fights like SOPA, that there will be an ability for people of both parties and for people who come from the left and the right to work together by sharing that aversion to technocracy or to reaction against technology? And would you agree that the central premise for that movement really has to be the sort of regulatory humility that Gordon and Tom and others were talking about yesterday?
Thanks. I am an optimist, as you can tell, I think, from my talk. And I think there is a great hunger on all sides for people to come together in pragmatic and sensible ways that empower the benefits of technology for people. I don't think I subscribe to the notion that there are people who are reflexively technology averse. I think you see people who are concerned about the impact of technology in their neck of the woods. But in general, most people, I think, acknowledge and accept and are really happy with the overall developments that we've seen in the last couple of generations. The challenge, I think, is trying to figure out a way for all of us, industry, inventors, government, to work together in a collaborative way that that balances the desire to avoid cutting off or chilling innovation with an understandable desire to jump in and engage in the latest new trend, and harmonize those two things and say, look, how do we create a lasting infrastructure that guides policy creation and formation that's a more stable and engaging infrastructure for all of us to work on?
Maybe one more.
Thanks, Kent. That was a great speech and very clear on suggested reforms for patent litigation. What do you think the realistic prospects are that you can get Congress to entertain the reforms, loser pays, and perhaps distinguishing between pharma patents and technology patents, and or that the Federal Circuit will go along. They seem to constantly be expanding business method patents, and even after being reined in, perhaps by the Supreme Court. Do you think there are realistic prospects that technology patent law ought to be modified, and will this Congress or any Congress in the near term be willing to consider them, even in the interest of promoting innovation?
Again, I'm an optimist, a realistic optimist, but an optimist. I recognize that Congress went through a long, 5, 6, 7-year debate before coming up with the American Invents Act, which had some positive aspects but didn't address some of the issues that we're seeing today. In a sense, we are seeing a really challenging situation in the world of software right now. The smartphone wars are the most tangible evidence of that, and I think that has caught people's attention and crystallized interest in engaging in this. I know that Dave Kapos and the PTO are actively looking at the general issue and looking for ways to improve how they're approaching it. It's clear that, as we heard yesterday, members of the federal bench have weighed in, expressing concerns about how the way the system is working for software patents. And I have to think that that can't help but mobilize some energy for change. And our hope in the next weeks and months to come is to start to work with others to agree on a narrow, focused agenda for reform that doesn't necessarily implicate all the different interest groups that were involved in the American Invents Act debate, but solves a narrow problem with a narrow set of solutions.
Well, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.